He said, that's all right. That's okay. Here's what Cameron said in his letter. He said, "Dear Pastor Benson, we live in the midst of challenging times in both the capital city and the state. There are pressing questions facing citizens, businesses, and faith leaders. Questions such as, today, could a preacher be jailed for sharing biblical truths from the pulpit? Today, could a Sunday school or Bible teacher be jailed for similar offenses? Today, could a church, business, or other facility that maintains a public accommodation be forced by law to allow men to use the women's bathrooms, locker rooms, or shower facilities? Could the state of South Carolina become the next ground zero for the battle to erode religious liberty?" These are questions that are facing us, and I and about 40 other pastors were astounded when we found out what was actually being passed in our city. And so I put some water up here for you, Cameron. Would you give Cameron a warm Willow Lake hand as he comes to share with you?
All right, oh, there we go. Well, good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you. I felt like, as I told somebody a minute ago, I felt like Noah trying to navigate the flood to get over here. Anything that crosses Gills Creek, it's just out. It's done. I hope y'all please, pray for the city. There's a lot of people that are hurting. I talked to a gentleman today, and who's a friend, and his entire, downstairs of his house, man, it's just gone. It's just gone. They've had to move out and everything, and we've got people that don't have water. Thankfully, looks like we have stabilized, or are in the process of getting stabilized, our downtown water supply, which comes from the Columbia Canal, which actually, I don't know, I think that one does not supply y'all out here. We actually sell water to Blythewood. So Columbia is your source of water. So what happens down there is very, very important for out here as well. But anyway, we'll get through that. And hopefully it'll bring us together, and Lord willing, it might actually spark a revival. Would be great. So my name's Cameron Runyon. I'm an at-large city council member in the city of Columbia, which means I represent every citizen in the city. One of two seats that does that, 135,000 constituents, and wanted to share with you this evening some things that have come to light, some activities that have happened in the city of Columbia that will be ultimately impactful for the whole state of South Carolina if we don't bring light to these issues and we don't rise up as Christians to oppose what's going on, because what is going on opposes everything that Scripture tells us is good and true and right. So let me just walk you through. We'll go ahead and hit the... one of the temptations with this contemporary issues around human sexuality is to think that there's a lot of people out there, I would say most of the people, who think that we are sort of evolving as human beings, and this is part of the natural evolution of Western civilization, and of course now global civilization, that you just get to the point where transgenderism and homosexuality are just part of evolving and becoming a more sophisticated society, and it's a good thing. Well, the reality is, as you can see by that, is that the world has been here before. This isn't the first rodeo for the world in these issues. We're not the first civilization to go through these issues. And I will promise you that the end of these issues will be no different this time than it was in every previous era. And the end has been that society has destroyed itself from the inside out and become its own worst enemy. Let me go to the next slide. So let me give you some background. We're going to talk about a couple of issues. This presentation is split into the first part, which we're about to get into, was something that happened that was stopped temporarily, at least, by the church. And then we're going to get into a second part of the presentation that deals with some adjoining issues that we'll come to in a minute. But let's go with the first one. Late last year and then into the early part of this year, the mayor in the city of Columbia, Steve Benjamin, y'all may know him, the mayor very aggressively pushed a sexual orientation and gender identity law in the capital city. You'll see it referred to as SOGI. That's how I generally refer to it in the presentation. That's the acronym that's now used to describe these laws. But what I want to do when I start is to reassure you that what you're about to hear about is going to be very frightful. The good thing is that because the church rose up, we were able to stop it for the time being. Next one. Go to the next slide. Thank you. So what would this law have done as proposed had it passed? This law would have created a 7-member commission appointed by the Columbia City Council to conduct secret investigations of people and businesses and others in the city of Columbia based on supposed discrimination against others on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation. The commission would have been empowered to review all the existing city laws, everything in the city of Columbia, to make sure that they were compliant with this worldview. The commission would have been empowered to review every single proposed law that was coming before the city council for vote to make sure that it would be compliant with this moral worldview. And the real bad thing, if that wasn't bad enough, is that the secrecy component of this law said that if you were drugged before the secret commission and investigated and you talked about it, you could be put in jail. This is the capital of South Carolina, y'all. The next one, please. So I'm going to tell you about this consultant. It's important to understand because it's important to understand how these things happen. And one of the well-worn paths in politics, if you want to push a worldview, a moral worldview that you know may be at odds with a large portion of the people, one of the ways that you do it is that you create a commission that can be your political cover to go out and enact your worldview in the city. And when you're creating the commission, you hire someone to come in and be the advocate for that position. So you don't actually have to do it. You hire somebody to do it for you to give you political cover. And that's exactly what happened here. Now the city hired this consultant to get this law passed. If we'll go to the next one. So let me tell you who she was. And this is important to understand the playbook of how these laws are being passed at the local level around America now. This lady, woman, is a former elected representative from Salt Lake City, Utah. She was the head of promoting the efforts of Planned Parenthood for a very large part of the nation. She was the executive director of South Carolina Equality, which is a homosexual advocacy organization that was very successful in doing a lot of things relative to these issues and was very involved with overturning South Carolina's marriage amendment to the Constitution recently. And she was also a surrogate mother for 2 homosexual men. Next one. She was paid for with taxpayer dollars, and her job was to establish, secure passage of this law, and then implement this law. Now think about that. She was paid with taxpayer dollars to secure passage of a law in the city. So the taxpayers paid someone internally to lobby their council to pass a law and then implement it. It's the most convoluted lobbying structure I've ever seen, and taxpayers had to pay for it, and they didn't even know it. She was to establish procedures to enforce existing anti-discrimination laws, develop procedures to investigate you, develop a database to track what you were doing, and to educate and train the police on all of the above. Next one. This is a good news. On April 10th, she very suddenly and without, I didn't see it coming. She, after taking some real pressure from the church and me, she resigned her position, and when she issued her resignation letter, it was quite scathing, and she took a hammer to my head and to the head of the church. She was very frustrated by the fact that the church had risen up against what she was trying to do. Next one. So this is just a quick recap of how this thing went down. It was on the agenda for a vote on the 27th. 3 days before, it was the clergy that rose up that were able to get it pulled from the agenda. At the time that it was pulled, the mayor very defiantly declared that this law would be coming back for a vote, and he at that time formed an ad hoc committee of himself and 2 other council members who were very supportive of this law. And on February 24th, they held that ad hoc committee meeting thinking that they were going to sell this thing to the public. It didn't go very well. On March 18th, the mayor was really not deterred, and he said, we're going to continue the fight. In other words, we're going to bring this back. The next one. On April 10th, the consultant resigned. April 13th, one of the members of the mayor's ad hoc committee said it was going to come back for a vote. On April 22nd, the mayor was back in the press saying that it was in a holding pattern, which means it's not gone. We're waiting right now for an opportunity to bring it back. And I put all that in there because I want you to understand that when you defeat these laws, don't think they go away. They may retreat, but they're coming back. And it's only through the vigilance of the church that these things don't get enacted all over the state of South Carolina. Next one. This was one of the more disturbing things, I think, that happened in this whole episode. On the Friday before this thing was scheduled for a vote the following Tuesday, so Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday was going to be the vote. This lesbian activist, Christine Johnson, went to the South Carolina Human Affairs Commission, and she somehow persuaded the South Carolina Human Affairs Commission and their legal counsel to issue an endorsement letter supporting this proposed law that would have created a secret commission to investigate people. I don't know what she told them to get them to do that, but they were going to do it. Now, the reason it's important is that if the state of South Carolina, through an agency, had sanctioned this law, which they were prepared to do, it would have set the groundwork for this law to be promulgated all over the state of South Carolina very, very quickly into every town and city in South Carolina. Well, thankfully, because the Holy Spirit will never leave you blind. You may not like what He shows you, but He will not leave you blind. She was so excited that she had gotten this endorsement that she sent an email out announcing that she had got this endorsement to City Council that night on that Friday, January 23rd. And it allowed me then to call on some friends in the legislature to go to the director of the South Carolina Human Affairs Commission and let him know that it would be a very bad career move for them to continue down this path. And so the endorsement that was going to happen never did happen. But we came very, very close to that happening. It would have been, it's important to understand the seriousness of what is going on here and how slick this movement is. Next one. Okay, so I said there were going to be 2 sections. We just finished section 1. That's the good part. Some really bad things were going to happen. The church rose up and the church stopped it. The bad part. In the process of this law being attempted to be passed, in the research and just unearthing things that were happening in the city, I discovered that there were already 2 laws on the books that got passed in 2008 with no discussion, with no public input, with nothing. They were very quietly passed. And they've been sitting there since 2008, waiting to be operationalized, waiting for the culture to move to the point where they could begin to operationalize these laws. And that's what this was all about. Okay. Next one. So perspective, at the time that these laws were passed in 2008, I assume everyone in this room, if you were old enough to vote at that time, that you were at the ballot box in 2006 voting on whether or not the state of South Carolina would define marriage the same way that God defines marriage. And 78% of South Carolina said, yep, we define marriage the same way that God defines marriage through Scripture. 22% didn't. Let me tell you, as someone is an elected official, what I would give for a 78% victory. Next one. That's pretty overwhelming support. Next slide. So at the time that was happening in that atmosphere, this is the direction that the capital city decided to take. These are all pictures from Columbia, South Carolina Pride Festival, and 2 women getting married at the courthouse. Next one. So as I mentioned earlier, these laws were passed without any public discussion. You can see this is the copy of the original document. The 2 council members who sponsored it, one of whom still sits on the council today. And we're going to talk about them now. Next one, please. At the time that they were passed, the Alliance Defending Freedom, it used to be called Alliance Defense Fund back then, but it's now Alliance Defending Freedom, a pretty well-known legal organization. For lack of a more eloquent term, they freaked out when this happened. And this is, I think, a 6-page letter or something like that. It's a very long letter, so it was so long they had an executive summary. All the reasons that this is a train wreck waiting to happen. What are you people doing in Columbia, South Carolina? And then the conclusion was you need to rescind these laws. Next one. So here are the 2 laws. One that is focused on we don't want to discriminate in housing, and one says we don't want to discriminate in public accommodations. So that sounds really good. We like that. Well, let's see what they actually do. Next one. So housing discrimination says that it is unlawful to cause panic, incite unrest, create or play upon fear that the introduction of homosexuals or transgenders into an area may be bad for the area. It is unlawful, furthermore, to aid, compel, or incite a person to engage in any of those acts or practices declared unlawful. This goes to speech. This says there are things you cannot say if it offends the culture. Next one. So some pretty straightforward questions here. Who gets to decide what constitutes playing upon fear, causing panic? Who gets to define that? It's not defined in the law. If you offer a sincerely held belief about homosexuality, could you be accused of inciting someone to discriminate? Is the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, the Book of Mormon, any of the religious texts forbidden under this law? Because all of those speak directly to these issues. And the answer is yes, that under this law, it literally makes the Bible hate speech. Next one. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on these laws in a minute. I'm just trying to give you an overview. So, public accommodations says that it is unlawful for you to segregate or differentiate in matters of public accommodations on the basis of someone's gender identity, sexual orientation, or gender. Think about that for a minute. You cannot differentiate based on gender. They don't have to be confused about their gender. You can't differentiate based on gender in public accommodations. Next one. So what this is, Family Research Council says that this is a bathroom bill, pretty straightforward. Among the implications of these bills is that the use of sex-specific facilities such as men's and women's public restrooms, locker rooms, and showers can no longer be limited on the basis of a person's actual biological sex. Next one. So, what happens if you violate this law? Well, if you violate this law by supposedly influencing a person to discriminate in housing, we're going to get some applications in a minute, or allowing a man into the women's bathrooms or locker rooms, then for every single day that you violate the law, it is a separate and distinct violation. And each one of those carries $500 and 30 days in jail, up to. Okay? When I discovered this, I thought, I'm not a dumb person, but I'm not a lawyer either. So let me engage a lawyer who specializes in dealing with these religious freedom issues and make sure I'm reading this right. And so I went back to the ADF, which had issued the original letter 7 years ago, and said, hey, I found these laws, I found your letter, can you find me someone in South Carolina who can look at these laws and make sure that I'm reading this right? Because they didn't really render a legal interpretation on the laws. ADF didn't render a legal interpretation on the laws originally. They said it's bad policy, and here's why. So I wanted to know, could a preacher be put in jail for something they preach? Can I be put in jail if I own a business and I won't allow a man into the women's shower? And the bottom line is that you can see for yourself through there that the answer is absolutely yes. Okay, next. So application time. Housing non-discrimination law. You would have a very straightforward application of that law under the actual housing. So you have a hotel and you have homosexual men who want a room in the hotel. You're uncomfortable with that, and so you deny them. Well, you can be put in jail in the city of Columbia. You own a duplex, and we'll use this church as a great example. Let's say you have a young mother, single mother with 2 boys, and her husband or boyfriend left her alone with these kids. In that process, she came to know the Lord, and she's trying to now raise her boys so that they don't make the same mistakes that she made. She's become a member of your church. She's raising her children up that way. She rents a duplex in the city of Columbia. The other side of the duplex, let's say you own the duplex, you rent to a nice young man, mother's on one side, 2 boys, nice young man on the other side. Turns out the nice young man's a transvestite, and you didn't know it. And he starts dressing like a woman and telling these 2 little boys who are coming to your church that they can be women if they want to be women too. They don't have to be boys, and gender's of the mind, it's not of the body, and the Bible is nonsense. If you evict the transvestite for that, you can be put in jail. That's a straightforward application of that law. An aggressive application of that law would be your pastor stands up and preaches on the second half of Romans 1 in his pulpit, because by preaching on the second half of Romans 1, you have incited people to discriminate against others on the basis of their gender identity or sexual orientation. And don't think this isn't where we're going, because it is. Every single day it gets there faster and faster. Okay? Another one might be is you stand up and you tell a friend that if they let all these transvestites move into their neighborhood, it's going to be bad for children. You just violated the law. You can be put in jail for that. The public accommodations law, which is the bathroom bill, it's just real straightforward. A business, a school, a church, a daycare, any of those under this law in the city of Columbia can be compelled under penalty of jail time to allow boys to use the girls' bathrooms or the girls' locker rooms. So pick your high school, whatever it is. If it's in the city of Columbia under this law, you can be forced to allow the boys into the girls' locker rooms. I'm not going to hit all these, and I'll be happy to share that. You may even have the presentation already, so I think you do. You can share it, and you all can read the media stuff. But I think our nature is to think this couldn't happen here. So what I wanted to do was to grab, and some of this stuff unfortunately is already getting dated because it's like 6 months old, and this revolution, this velocity on this moral revolution is moving so fast that every day there's just a new, this new press coming out. But I sort of started in Western Europe and moved over to America, and then moving will end in South Carolina. But the first 2 in Sweden and Scotland, it's real simple. They're arresting preachers for saying that homosexuality is a sin, and they're putting them in jail. That's what's happening today. Canada, they're teaching sex ed in first grade now. They're teaching, I believe, 3rd graders are taught about homosexuality. The federal government back during the Indiana RFRA fight, if y'all remember all that, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act fight in Indiana, one of the very high-level bureaucrat for the federal government, she said that people who vote for Nazis to govern and then call them, people are Nazis who call themselves, well, there you go. People in the red states vote for Nazis to govern and then call themselves Christian. It will not end well for them. And that was her prophetic statement, I guess. This is at a very high level in the United States federal government. It's in the town council. Next one. California, we expect nuttiness in California, I guess. We're gonna get to in a minute to where a piece of this story that's not here. In California, they're 13 and 14-year-olds. They're in the public schools. Essentially, got people training them how to have sex, and the standard. This is very important. The standard now is shifted, and in California, I think it is now shifted at the state level via law, and it will come this way. The standard is no longer, is it right or wrong? The standard is now consent. And so 13-year-old and a 14-year-old, if there is consent, then it is morally okay in the eyes of the law. That is the subtle, it's not that subtle, but that's the way that they sell it now. So when you hear people talking about these kinds of sexual issues, you'll hear in their framing, their language, it's framed around the language of consent. Well, they're two consenting adults, or they're two consenting people. Everything becomes now about consent. Well, we know that the human heart is wicked and deceitful, and so consent, human heart will consent to anything at some point in its life, but that's now the standard. The standard is consent to sin. In California, the Queer Student Alliance did a big exercise on this homosexual transgender issue. There were a couple students that didn't agree with it, and they just publicly shamed them. Now, Queer Student Alliance. This organization, and there may be another one that is a parallel to it, is in South Carolina schools. If you have children or grandchildren or nieces or nephews, they are exposed to this here. Next one. Washington College okays exposure of young girls to naked man. They claim that their non-discrimination policy, we wrap everything in non-discrimination nowadays, it doesn't allow a school to stop a man from exposing himself to girls as young as 6 years old in a women's locker room. You know about the ministers who were threatened to perform in Idaho, to perform same-sex weddings. Transgender tenants, the third one. This one is just like the city's law that we have on the books already. There were some boys who wanted to live in the girls' housing, probably for all the right reasons, I'm sure. In all three cases, the women and their parents freaked out and did not want their daughter sharing living space with someone who is male. The state's new law prohibiting discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity in the sale or rental of housing took effect Tuesday. So these were young men trying to take advantage of this new law, and they were protected under the law. Now what happens is, today, the women and their parents freak out. Tomorrow it becomes normal. And we, in the city of Columbia, already have this law. And they have one in Myrtle Beach, and they have one in Charleston, and they have one in Richland County, which you're in. High School League approves transgender policy. The boys are playing on the girls' sports teams. Happening all over America. Next one. Colorado. These are getting so normal now. It seems like 10 years ago news. Kids, first grade, boy thinks he's a girl. Mama and daddy tell him it's okay, and not only that, he deserves the rights of a girl in first grade. So let's open up to all the boys to the girls' bathrooms. Michigan, a man thinking he was a woman was using the locker room at Planet Fitness. This woman freaked out because there was a naked man in the women's locker room. And Planet Fitness did the logical thing. They revoked the woman's membership for complaining. Maine, teaching transgenderism to kindergartners. Wesleyan College now has LGBTQQFAGPBDSM housing. I can't even read all that. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, transsexual, queer, questioning, flexual, asexual, gender blank, polyamorous, bondage, discipline, dominant, submission, sadism, masochism, housing. Now, they don't have Christian housing. You can't have Christian housing, but you can have that. Now, y'all think about this. Wesleyan was a Christian college. You want to know what happens when the church is silent? There it is. That's what happens when the church is silent. Next one. Gay rights out of control in Texas. University of North Carolina, Charlotte adopts transgender bathroom policy. We're getting a little closer to home now. Policy gives City of Charlotte transgender employees bathroom choice. You may remember that one. It wasn't, I think it might have been earlier this year. It's about the same time we were fighting ours in Columbia trying to stop it. They were not able to stop theirs. And then Columbia and Charleston lead South Carolina for gay equality, study says. So that's the score of 74, which likely stems from Mayor Steve Benjamin's support for extending city benefits to same-sex spouses. By the way, I was the only member of city council that voted against that, and they wanted to hang me on that cross for voting against it. They still do. Next one. So in our own schools here in town and around the area, Irmo High School, today there is a boy who thinks that he is a girl, and in high school dresses as a girl in high school. Matter of fact, my understanding is that he's not even bound by the dress code that the girls have, that his skirts can be shorter than theirs can be at the school. There was a young man, I actually happened to know his father. He's a police officer for the city of Columbia, very good Christian man. And his son, being a good Christian boy, offered to pray for this young man who was so confused. He was dressing as a woman, a girl. And he was yanked into the principal's office along with his daddy and told, "You're not allowed to tell that boy you're going to pray for him." Columbia Elementary School, transgender boys using the girls' bathrooms, our teachers' bathrooms right now. Winthrop College has already converted 30 plus of their bathrooms into transgender bathrooms at Winthrop College. Next one, please. University of South Carolina. This came to me from a lady who runs an international Christian ministry at the University of South Carolina. And one of the young women who was involved with this Christian ministry is called His International. Y'all may know about it. Pretty well-known Christian organization on campus. Her teacher, who is a lesbian activist, told her that she needed to go out and have sex with as many and as much and every stripe and variety that there is while she was at college. And she took her advice. And now she's decided to be a lesbian. But the culture would tell her that she was born that way. But the professor said you need to go try it. Okay, next. So, genderbread person. Genderbread person, have y'all seen this before? This is, the first time this hit in the press was that first story I showed you from California, where the school is encouraging children at age 13 and 14 to have sex. They were passing this out in the school to 13-year-olds. And what this does is this says that gender is not a product of the way God made you, which we know it is by way of fact. But instead, gender is a combination of your mental identity, your attraction, and then your biology. And then you put that soup together and you get the expression on top of that for your gender. And so what you have here is a spectrum that moves from this end to that end, and then you combine all of those, and you have literally, according to this worldview, an infinite number of genders. Infinite. Well, you know, I saw this thing and I said, this was in October of last year, or October, November last year, I think it was October, that I found this thing through that article I showed you earlier. And I thought, well, you know, that's California, it's the land of fruits and nuts, and you know, what do you expect out there? They're going to do that. Well, it's now at the University of South Carolina. And if you'll notice, I don't know if you can tell on here, but genderbread is garnet. And the reason it's garnet is that it is part of an official University of South Carolina document put out through the Office of Multicultural Affairs at the University of South Carolina. If you go to their website, you can find the presentation. It's right there. I saved it, so if you need it, I can email it to you. But it is an official university document. So now the state of South Carolina, through the university, is pushing this. Next. We're going to skip over that one. So this just to conclude, this is where we are. This is the battle that's before us. Kai Feldblum is a female, I think she's lesbian, with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is a 5-member commission, the federal government, a very powerful commission. And this was her quote, that there can be a conflict between religious liberty and sexual liberty, but in almost all cases, the sexual liberty should win. We all remember this. And I just want you to think about something. The White House is the symbol of America. God uses symbols all the time. Symbols are very important in God's economy. Inside the brick and mortar symbol of the United States of America is the enfleshed symbol of America. That night, on the built symbol of America, where the enfleshed symbol of America dwells, was placed the abominated sign of the covenant. The rainbow is God's covenant to man. And this movement has taken God's covenant and they have turned it into an abomination. God will not be mocked. Now, I don't know if this is the kind of church where I can say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. The fight that you just saw with this secret commission and the things that have happened in this city over the past year, there is a battle between righteousness and evil like people that are twice my age have never seen before. God He knows every sparrow that falls in the woods, and He knows every raindrop that falls on the city. There are no accidents. You go down on Main Street right now, and you're going to see a bunch of rainbow flags hanging off of city light poles on Main Street right now. Because on October 24th, which is just a few weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, there will be a festival where 30,000 homosexuals will descend on the capital city. And this capital city, your capital city, in taxpayer dollars, contributed $47,500 to pay for the party that they're going to have on Main Street. They have sanctioned it, and they have celebrated it. We have been warned what's coming. Now, my hope is, my prayer is that out of judgment, as this was in my mind was clearly is God's judgment. I mean, you don't get this kind of flood, it is judgment. But out of that, God's always calling His church to repentance, and He's calling His church to be the church. He uses that judgment to quicken His church. And so that's my exhortation to all of y'all, to engage into what's going on in your community. I mean, we got to train up in the four walls, but then we got to go outside the four walls, because we're losing the culture. We've lost the culture. we're about to lose a generation that's coming behind us, because they see what I showed you is just a thumbnail of what they see every single day. And so for them, for you, it's shock. To them, it's just normal. You know, they think that, you know, any little boy can grow up and love a boy instead of a woman, and that any little boy can be a girl if he wants to be a girl, or vice versa. Or, you know, back in November, this is where we're headed. Back in November, there was an article. You can look this up on the internet. I would advise you maybe to think long and hard before you do, because it's really disturbing. In New York Magazine in November, which is a mainstream publication, there was an article called "What It's Like to Date a Horse." It's very graphic. It's actually quite pornographic with the descriptions that it gives. I couldn't even get through the whole thing, and I put it down, so that's it. I've seen enough. But the themes that run through that are very similar to what you see here. The horse consents, and we love each other. This is a man that dates mayors. The horse consents, and we love each other. And, well, I've only ever been attracted to horses. I was made this way. I can't help it. This is who I am. So as you begin to play this out further and further and further, you see how maybe Rome wasn't quite as bad as where we're headed. It's going to get a whole lot worse. But it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to. We can stand in the gap. We can speak truth into the culture. God will have to do the work, but He'll use us to do it. So I thank you for the opportunity to come out here and share this with you tonight. And I'd be happy to answer, if you got any questions, I'd try to answer a few questions. And I am going to have to scoot back downtown with all that we got on. The press is calling me, and everybody's buzzing me right now with everything. I don't know what's going on, but we'll get to it in a minute. But can I answer any questions?
How close is it, Cameron, do you think that it could be where a pastor could be? I mean, how many, if the law's already on